Just don't do it again. And if you come near the house again,
I won't come near the house again. I won't contact you again. Okay?
I think that's best.
On the 9th of July, 2016, a 19-year-old woman named Shana Grice called the police in Sussex, England, and told them something that should have set off every alarm bell available to a modern police force. She said her ex-boyfriend had stolen the key to her back door, let himself into her house without her knowledge, crept into her bedroom while she was asleep, and simply stood there, watching her. He was gone by the time she woke up. She reported it immediately. 6 weeks later, that same man walked into her bedroom again, except this time she never woke up at all. What makes this case one of the most infuriating in recent British criminal history isn't just what her ex-boyfriend did to her. It's what happened in between those two moments, the reports she made to police again and again over the course of 6 months, and the fact that instead of protecting her, officers actually fined her for wasting their time. If stories like this make your blood boil the way they make ours, do us a favor and hit subscribe right now, because we cover cases exactly like this one almost every single day, and this channel exists specifically to make sure stories like Shana's don't get quietly forgotten, buried under a stack of case files and closed reports the way her own warnings once were. Let's get into what actually happened to her. Shana Grice grew up in the Brighton area, on England's south coast, and by 19 she was working in the accounts department of a company based in nearby Hove, building the kind of quiet, stable working life a lot of 19-year-olds are still years away from. She lived in Portslade, a quiet coastal town just west of Brighton itself. At some point before all of this began, Shana had dated a man named Michael Lane, a tire and exhaust fitter who was several years older than her, 27 when the events of this case unfolded. There was no reported history of physical violence between them during the relationship, nothing that suggested Lane was capable of what he would eventually do. But at Christmas of 2015, Shana and Lane stopped seeing each other, and almost immediately afterward, the first signs of what would become a sustained campaign of harassment began to appear. At first, Lane tried a softer approach. He sent Shana a bunch of flowers for her 19th birthday, an unwanted gesture that Shana found unsettling enough that she complained to her boss about it. Just days later, she discovered that the tires on her car had been slashed. In a moment that, in hindsight, reads as almost unbearably strange, Michael Lane appeared out of nowhere shortly afterward and offered to help change them for her, positioning himself as the helpful ex rather than the obvious suspect. Around the same time, Shana had reconnected with a previous boyfriend from her school years, a young man named Ashley Cook. Not long after the two of them got back together, Ashley found his own car had been keyed, deep scratches gouged into the paintwork, with a note left on the windscreen that read, in part, that Shana had and always would cheat on him. Michael Lane had also secretly placed a GPS tracking device on Shana's car at some point during this campaign, giving him the ability to monitor her movements without her ever realizing she was being followed at all, a level of surveillance that made every one of Lane's supposedly coincidental appearances near her far less coincidental than they looked. On the 8th of February, 2016, Shana went to Sussex police for the first time and reported what was happening. She told them she believed she was being stalked, that Lane had been hiding outside her home, sending her unwanted flowers, and that he had damaged her car and left the threatening note on her new boyfriend's vehicle. To their credit, police responded to this initial complaint fairly quickly, tracking Lane down and formally warning him to stay away from her. For a brief moment, it looked like the system might actually work the way it was supposed to. That changed on the 24th of March, 2016, when Shana reported that Lane had grabbed her hair and snatched her phone during an altercation. Lane was arrested on suspicion of assault, but during the course of the investigation, he denied the allegation entirely and showed officers text messages from Shana that suggested she had, at some point during this period, told him she wanted to be with him. Faced with those messages, and with the fact that Shana had not initially disclosed the full, complicated history between herself and Lane when she first approached police, the investigating officer decided the assault complaint wasn't credible. Rather than pursuing the case further, officers issued Shana a fixed penalty notice, a fine of £90, for wasting police time. No further action was taken against Lane at all. Sit with that for a second. A young woman who had already been stalked, tracked by a hidden GPS device, and harassed by a man refusing to accept a breakup, was now the one being formally punished by the very police force she had gone to for protection, while the man she'd reported walked away with nothing. On the 9th of July, 2016, Lane escalated further, using a stolen key to let himself into Shana's home in the early hours of the morning and entering her bedroom to watch her while she slept. Her housemate, a woman named Emma King, later told the court she had woken to find Lane looming directly over Shana's bed. The next day, in a phone conversation Shana secretly recorded, she confronted Lane directly, asking him why he had taken the key and entered her home uninvited at 6 in the morning. Lane told her he had wanted to see her and talk to her, and that he knew she wouldn't have let him in if he'd simply asked. Shana, clearly shaken, told him he could have done anything to her while she slept, that he could have flipped at any point, and that what he'd done was deeply wrong. Lane was arrested for theft in connection with the stolen key, but was ultimately just cautioned and told, once again, to stay away from her. The very next day, on the 10th of July, Shana called police again, this time reporting that she'd received several phone calls from a withheld, unknown number, including one call where all she could hear on the other end was heavy breathing. The court would later hear that Shana was told there were no further lines of inquiry available to pursue, and that the case would simply be left on file. It was the last time Shana Grice ever contacted the police about Michael Lane. In total, across roughly 6 months, Shana had gone to Sussex police multiple separate times, reporting stalking, criminal damage, threatening notes, a break-in, being watched while she slept, and anonymous, unsettling phone calls. And across nearly all of those reports, the overall response she received amounted to a warning here, a caution there, a case quietly closed, and in one instance, an actual financial penalty levied directly against her, the exact opposite of what anyone in her position should reasonably have expected from the police force she kept turning to. On the 25th of August, 2016, Michael Lane entered Shana Grice's home on Christory Road, in the Mile Oak area of Portslade. He walked into her bedroom and cut her throat. He then set the bedroom on fire, apparently attempting to destroy evidence of what he had just done. Shana's body was discovered in a smoke-filled room. She was 19 years old. 2 days before the murder, Shana had gone to meet Lane one final time. Nothing about that meeting is disputed, though the exact conversation that took place has been described only in broad terms through court proceedings and family statements. Shana wanted to make it unmistakably clear, in person, that whatever had once existed between them was completely finished, and that her future was with Ashley Cook. It was, in a sense, exactly the kind of direct, unambiguous conversation that people are often told to have with someone who won't take a hint. It didn't work. If anything, it appears to have hardened whatever was already building inside Lane rather than putting it to rest. Lane was arrested the following day. In police interviews, portions of which were later played for the jury, he offered an account that grew increasingly difficult to believe the more of it came out. He initially claimed he had walked into her bedroom and simply found her already dead, her body slumped against the bed, and that he had left without calling an ambulance because he was in shock. Over the course of the investigation and the trial that followed, Lane eventually admitted that he had, in fact, stalked Shana in the months leading up to her death, and he admitted that he had lied to police repeatedly during his interviews. Despite those admissions, he continued to deny that he had killed her. The trial took place at Lewes Crown Court and lasted 2 weeks. Prosecutors laid out the entire 6-month timeline for the jury, report by report, showing exactly how many times Shana had gone to police asking for help, and exactly how the response had escalated in severity for her at almost the same pace that Lane's behavior escalated toward her. Jurors also watched taped police interviews with Lane, recorded the day after Shana's body was found, and heard testimony describing the discovery of the note left on Ashley Cook's car and the conversation Emma King had woken to, of Lane standing silently over Shana's bed in the dark. The prosecution argued that Lane had become genuinely obsessed with Shana, and that the tipping point, the moment that pushed him from stalking into murder, was her decision to fully renew her relationship with Ashley Cook, closing off, in Lane's mind, any remaining possibility of getting her back. After hearing all of the evidence, the jury took just over 2 hours to reach its verdict. In March of 2017, Michael Lane was found guilty of murdering Shana Grice. He was sentenced to life imprisonment, with a minimum term of 25 years before he can even be considered for parole. At sentencing, the judge, Mr. Justice Green, didn't limit his remarks to Lane's conduct alone. He turned his attention directly to Sussex police, delivering a rebuke that would go on to define the public conversation around this entire case. He said that tragically, when Shana sought help from the police, she received none. He went further, suggesting that Michael Lane had likely come to believe, based on how his previous encounters with officers had gone, that even if he continued his obsessive campaign against her, the police were unlikely to actually do anything meaningful to stop him. The judge was also sharply critical of the decision to find Shana in the first place, saying that officers had jumped to conclusions, effectively treating her as though she were the wrongdoer who had committed a criminal offense, while treating Michael Lane, the man who had spent months stalking her, as the actual victim in the situation. After the verdict, Shana's parents released a statement describing what the previous months had done to their family. They said their daughter's life had become a nightmare that had visibly affected both her mental and physical health in the time before her death, and that the loss of their only child had left them, in their own words, mere shells of their former selves. It was a rare kind of public grief, delivered not in anger at Michael Lane alone, but pointed just as squarely at the institution that had, according to a judge's own words, offered their daughter nothing when she came asking for help. Sussex police responded to the verdict with a public apology. The force's deputy chief constable, Bernie O'Reilly, told reporters that when officers looked back at the full circumstances leading up to Shana's murder, they recognized they might not have done the very best they could have. He revealed that he had personally visited Shana's family within days of her death to apologize on the force's behalf, and that the department had made a formal referral of its own conduct to what was then known as the Independent Police Complaints Commission, the predecessor to today's Independent Office of Police Conduct. It was, by any measure, a rare and unusually direct admission from a police force, coming not years later after sustained public pressure, but within days of the murder itself, while the investigation into Lane was still ongoing and long before any court had reached a verdict. That referral led to a lengthy independent review, and disciplinary proceedings were eventually brought against several of the officers who had handled Shana's case, each accused of falling short at a different point in the 6-month timeline. An officer known publicly only as P.C. Mills, due to reporting restrictions protecting his full identity, had been the investigating officer following Shana's July 9th report about the stolen key and the break-in. A disciplinary panel later found that Mills had failed to even review the case notes documenting Lane's already escalating pattern of behavior before he sat down to question him, a basic step that, had it been taken, might have shown him exactly how serious and how long-running Lane's obsession with Shana already was. The panel ruled that this failure amounted to gross misconduct. Mills resigned from the force before the panel could formally rule on his dismissal, though the panel stated clearly that had he not resigned, he would have been dismissed outright. Separately, the officer who had originally recommended issuing Shana's £90 fine, P.C. Trevor Godfrey, defended his decision years later at his own misconduct hearing, telling the panel bluntly that Shana had, in his assessment, absolutely wasted his time, and that her complaint had led him to arrest someone else on the strength of what he considered a false allegation. Godfrey went on to retire from the force in 2017, after 29 years of service, and left the hearing without expressing any real regret over the decision that had, in the eyes of a judge and the wider public, helped set the stage for what came next. In the weeks following Lane's conviction, an even more disturbing pattern came to light. Sussex police revealed that 13 other women had come forward independently to report that Michael Lane had stalked or harassed them as well, an incident spanning roughly the 3 years before Shana's murder, with one report describing contact stretching back a full decade. Each of those reports was reviewed alongside the Crown Prosecution Service, though in several cases, no further action was possible, either because there wasn't sufficient evidence of a criminal offense, because the woman involved didn't wish to support a prosecution, or because legal time limits on bringing certain charges had already expired by the time the reports were reviewed. Still, the sheer number of women coming forward made clear that Shana hadn't been an isolated case of one man's fixation. She had been the one who ultimately paid for a pattern of behavior that had apparently been going on, in various forms, for years, quietly, in the background of a man's life that most of the people around him would have described, right up until August 2016, as completely unremarkable. The independent review into Sussex Police's handling of the case produced more than a dozen formal recommendations for how the force needed to change, covering everything from officer training on recognizing genuine stalking behavior to improvements in how information about repeat offenders was tracked and shared internally between different teams and different reports, so that a pattern like Lane's would actually show up as a pattern the next time, rather than as a series of disconnected minor complaints handled by different officers who never compared notes. One recommendation went out more broadly, to every chief constable across England and Wales, stating that the kind of informal harassment warning notice issued to Lane back in February should not be relied upon as a substitute for a proper, robust investigation in stalking and harassment cases going forward. In direct response to Shana's case, Sussex Police also announced it would stop issuing fixed penalty notices for wasting police time in cases involving alleged domestic abuse, a policy change that arrived only after it was already far too late to help her. Shana's parents, Shana Grice and Richard Green, didn't stop pushing once the criminal trial and the disciplinary hearings had concluded. Represented by lawyer Neil Hudgell, they pursued a legal challenge seeking a full, independent inquest into their daughter's death, arguing that the internal police reviews and misconduct panels that had already examined the case hadn't gone far enough in scrutinizing exactly how so many separate opportunities to protect Shana had been missed. In December of 2021, a High Court judge ruled against the family, concluding that the earlier independent investigations had already established the relevant facts of the case and provided a sufficient element of public scrutiny on their own. Hudgell called the ruling hugely disappointing, noting the particularly painful timing of a decision that landed on Christmas Eve, a moment when most families are naturally thinking of the loved ones they've lost. The case resurfaced in the public conversation again in 2021, when Sky Crime aired a documentary titled Murder in Slow Motion, walking viewers through exactly how Sussex Police's handling of Shana's repeated reports had unfolded, failure by failure, month by month. In the documentary, a representative from the Independent Office of Police Conduct said plainly that Sussex Police had failed Shana, and that officers on the ground simply hadn't understood the difference between what looked, on the surface, like a minor dispute between two people who used to date, and what was actually a sustained, escalating pattern of stalking that any properly trained officer should have recognized as dangerous. What makes Shana Grice's case so difficult to sit with isn't a single failure, or a single bad decision made under pressure. It's the accumulation of chance after chance, month after month, where a trained police force had the opportunity to step in and treat an escalating stalking case as exactly what it was, and where that opportunity either went nowhere or, worse, turned back around onto the victim herself. There's also something particularly hard to shake about the detail of that recorded phone call, Shana asking Lane directly why he had let himself into her home at 6 a.m. to stand over her while she slept, and Lane's answer amounting to little more than that he simply wanted to talk to her, and knew she wouldn't otherwise let him in. It's the kind of answer that treats a serious, frightening violation as a minor inconvenience, and it's exactly the same minimizing instinct that, in a different form, seems to have shaped how some of the officers handling her case responded to her as well. Somewhere in the space between a stolen key and a bedroom set on fire, a 19-year-old woman did everything the system asks victims to do. She reported it. She kept reporting it. She told the people whose job it was to protect her exactly what was happening to her, in detail, again and again. And more than once, what came back to her wasn't protection. It was blame. Michael Lane is now serving a life sentence with a minimum of 25 years behind bars, and Sussex Police has changed several of its internal policies because of what happened to Shana Grice. But neither of those outcomes was ever going to be enough to undo the 6 months that led up to that August night in Port Slade, or to give Shana Grice back the life that so many warnings and phone calls, and one £90 fine, never managed to save. If this case left you as frustrated as it left us, that's exactly the kind of story we tell here. New true crime cases go up on this channel almost every single day, the ones that don't get the attention they deserve anywhere else. So hit subscribe now and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one. And if you know someone who needs to hear a story like Shana's, send this their way. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.